Welcome to this Al-Monitor Pro webinar on what comes next in U.S. Saudi relations. I'm Andrew Parasiliti, president of Al-Monitor.com, the award-winning media service covering the Middle East, based in Washington, D.C., with correspondents and contributors all over the region and worldwide. U.S. President Joe Biden was in Saudi Arabia last week, where he met with King Salman, Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, and the heads of the countries of the Gulf Cooperation Council, Egypt, Iraq, and Jordan, to discuss the impact of the trip on U.S.-Saudi relations and what comes next. We are joined today by Karen Elliott House. Karen is author of On Saudi Arabia, Its People, Past, Religion, Fault Lines, and Future. She is a senior fellow at Harvard University's Belfer Center for Science and International Affairs, a Pulitzer Prize recipient for her reporting on the Middle East, former president of Dow Jones International and publisher of the Wall Street Journal, a trustee of the Rand Corporation, and many other distinguished appointments and accomplishments. To our viewers, you can ask a question via the Q&A function on your Zoom platform. Karen, welcome. Let's get right into it. In a column in the Wall Street Journal this week, you referred to Biden's visit to the kingdom as, quote, worse than a missed opportunity, and compared it to Neville Chamberlain's Munich meeting with Adolf Hitler. That's really strong stuff. And I admit to being taken aback when I read it, because you, as articulately as anyone, have advocated for a reset in U.S.-Saudi ties. Isn't that exactly what President Biden did last week with his visit?
I think it's what he had the opportunity to do. So I absolutely agree he should have gone, because Saudi Arabia is more important to us and to the world now than it was when this relationship started nearly 80 years ago. But I don't believe he did that. Anytime a president goes and kind of leaves without any clear progress on the issue, the security issue that the Saudis are most concerned about, i.e. Iran, I think it's a setback. I think a lot of people misunderstood my Chamberlain analogy. I wasn't saying MBS is Hitler. I was saying Biden is Chamberlain, because Biden, like Chamberlain in Munich, went to Riyadh and to meet these Arab leaders and MBS and King Salman. And instead of achieving anything, he, like Chamberlain, who believed he could appease Hitler and avoid World War II, Biden believes he can appease Iran and avoid a worse mess in the Middle East. And my fear, as I said at the close of that column, is a year from the Chamberlain-Hitler meeting was World War III. I hope a year from this meeting, there is some progress that actually avoids that kind of conflagration, because things are getting worse and worse out there.
Karen, many had wanted Biden to get some type of concession from Riyadh on oil production to alleviate high oil and gas prices. How realistic is it to believe that Saudi Arabia can or would resume its role as swing producer? Do you expect any accommodation resulting from Biden's visit with regard to oil production and pricing?
I think Saudi Arabia will persuade OPEC Plus at their August meeting to raise production some. I don't think Saudi Arabia is going to personally go back to the independent role of swing producer, so that when the U.S. asks, they say how much. They will use their influence because they would like to avoid a worldwide recession. And if the price keeps going up, I think most people believe there's already a 50% chance of recession. That chance only increases, and that's not in the Saudi or OPEC Plus interest, because then oil prices will go down much more quickly than they want. They want them to stabilize. So I think there will be some minor contributions in million barrels a day altogether or something by announced in August for September.
Karen, you've spent so much time in the kingdom. You've interviewed MBS, I think, several times. You know those around him in the leadership. How do you assess his role at this time, 3.5 years after the murder of Khashoggi? And what do the Saudis at this point expect from the United States and the U.S. Saudi relationship?
I think he came out of this summit much stronger, and in my view, Biden came out much weaker. I wrote a piece a week ago before he landed in Riyadh saying the summit was likely to humble the president who sought to humble the crown prince. And I think that's exactly what happened. And MBS, on the contrary, I think illustrated, as Al Haig would say, I'm in charge here. You know, he organized that meeting with the Gulf states and the other Arabs, and the president attended it because he was looking for cover for meeting with MBS. But it shows that MBS, I think, was very much in charge of this trip. And he's now, I think it's very clear he's a leader of the Arab world. It's very interesting. I started going to the Middle East in 1978, and Egypt and Israel were the focus of all of us who wrote about the Middle East. Saudi Arabia was a country trying to buy advanced aircraft, and it had oil, but it was, you know, it was nothing like as important as Egypt or Israel. And now I would say Saudi Arabia, you know, has moved up the Arab ladder ahead of Egypt, ahead of Jordan, and certainly ahead of Iraq. Saddam gave Iraq meaning, and the current regime is not one that people have to take as seriously. So Saudi Arabia, I think, is the leader, and MBS is the leader of that Arab coalition.
Karen, we have a question, and just a reminder to our viewers, you can submit a question via the Q&A function, picking up regarding your column and what you were just describing regarding U.S. Saudi relations. Is it fair to describe the Biden meeting with MBS as appeasing NBS, given where Biden has been in terms of his campaign position on the issue, calling MBS a pariah?
Appeasing is, in my view, the wrong word. Humbling is the word I find more appropriate, because Biden, I think, got the worst of both worlds, because he wanted to emphasize, I'm not abandoning my pariah statement. Even after he left and he was asked if he regretted that statement, he said no. It is not productive if you've decided to meet with someone and reopen a relationship to then say, but I don't like him. The country's a pariah. I meant what I said. You know, it's rude, you know, when you're in another, in a host country to, I think, act like that it didn't assuage the Democratic critics of his trip. And I think it continued to insult the Saudis. But, you know, obviously, I think MBS certainly came out of it the winner. So I doubt that he's holding a grudge against Biden. Now, I think what they want to see is, what are we going to do? You know, how many of these statements, which weren't in many cases very substantive, will we really provide them with assurance and action that shows we're going to be there, not just a statement, we're not going to allow a vacuum to develop? And will we, if we're not going to really be there, will we provide them arms? Because they are going to continue to buy them from China and Russia. until they have a much higher degree of confidence than they have now that the U.S. is a reliable partner. And I don't see that happening in the near term.
Karen, there's a question. In your article, you said there not much was accomplished, but there was a conversation about the fragile Yemen truce. And President Biden has made the war in Yemen, or ending the war in Yemen, a top priority. He appointed an envoy, Tim Lenderking. August 2nd, the ceasefire, fragile ceasefire, comes up for renewal. What are the Saudi interests in Yemen, and what can we expect next? And is that the progress on Yemen, as fragile as it is, I keep saying fragile because it is that not for now a good news story for U.S. policy and U.S. Saudi relations?
Well, I don't see that as a result of this meeting. As you know, it was really Iran and Saudi Arabia that worked out that ceasefire back in April. The Saudis would love to get out of Yemen. They just don't have a way to do so without assuming that the Houthis will still be there with enmity. They can't find peace with honor, I guess is the way to put it. So I think unless the Iranians have come out of this summit with a sense that we won, they may have an incentive to encourage the Houthis to extend the ceasefire some more. Nobody seems to be ready right now to fight, and certainly not the Saudis. They would like to get out of it. So I have some optimism that the ceasefire could get extended for Iranian interests. I don't think we're all that influential. I mean, it's good that we try, and Tim Lenderking is a first-rate diplomat and a dedicated one. But I think, again, that's another one of the areas where President Biden claimed credit that he didn't deserve for extending that ceasefire.
Karen, we have a question from a viewer in Israel who is asking about Saudi-Israeli normalization, saying that the overflights are a nano-normalization step. What more can we expect, and how far can the normalization process go without some type of real political progress on the Israeli-Palestinian conflict?
The Saudis seem to me surprisingly determined by reiterating that we can't do this without a Palestinian solution. I think the overflights, because they had been going on for several years, I don't see that as much of, I mean, if they had been interrupted, that would have been a big step backward. But as the Saudis took the trouble to say, that had nothing to do with, they insist, with diplomacy. Now, why they felt it necessary to kind of in your face push back on that, I don't know, but I think it was not a huge accomplishment, because flights have been going from Israel to Dubai and the UAE for at least a couple of years. So I don't see what the big deal is, frankly, that it's now, publicly stated you can fly across Saudi airspace. I mean, Air India began flying across Saudi airspace to Tel Aviv, I think at least 3 years ago. So, it's another, to me, another of the phony claims of accomplishment that came out of this visit. And I think the president's kind of embrace of Israel and the continuing slap at Saudi Arabia made them, even as he was there meeting, made the Saudis feel they had to make clear that what their position is, because they don't want to be under an Israeli nuclear umbrella versus Iran. And I think they see all of this let's have a defense cooperation as our attempt to do that to them. And that's not something they want.
To our viewers, again, we've got some great questions lined up, but you can get in the queue through the Q&A function on your Zoom platform. Speaking of Iran and the concerns about its nuclear program, one of the concerns is that if Iran does continue in the development of its nuclear weapons, that Saudi Arabia could consider going nuclear in terms of a nuclear weapons capability. How do you see the question here on the Saudi civilian nuclear program? This was not discussed in the meetings, or at least not publicly discussed. How do you see the Saudi perception of nuclear power, both in terms of its energy policy, diversification of its resources, and in terms of a potential weapons capability if indeed there's no resolution on the Iranian nuclear front?
Well, the Crown Prince has said it in at least one, and I believe two interviews, that if the Iranians have a nuclear military capability, Saudi Arabia will too. And, you know, I think they don't have to rely on their civilian nuclear program to produce the material to create a bomb. That it is widely believed, at least, that they funded the Pakistani bomb effort and would thus be able to call on Pakistan for help in procuring their own nuclear capability. I don't think I think the Saudi regime is more confident, frankly, than the Iranian one. I mean, I think, you know, Iran, the theocracy there believes, just like North Korea does, that we have to have a nuclear capability to guarantee our survival. I don't think the Saudis, absent a nuclear threat from Iran, think they need nuclear weapons to guarantee the survival of the royal family.
The King of Saudi Arabia is the custodian of the two holy mosques, holy places in Mecca and Medina. Mohammed bin Salman, as Crown Prince, would be the inheritor of that title and that important position within the Islamic world and internationally. How do you see the Crown Prince's relationship with the religious establishment in Saudi Arabia?
He's in control of the religious establishment. You know, he has made clear that in that Atlantic interview, the last one a couple of months ago, that the religious establishment is not co-equal with the king, it is beneath the king. That there are certain things the Quran forbids and certain things it demands, and those he can't do anything about. But otherwise, it's his interpretation of the religion that matters. So he has basically, I think, people who, I haven't seen a religious policeman in Saudi Arabia in 4 years. They don't seem to be out and about, and even if they are, they have been ordered, you cannot torment or arrest people. So it simply doesn't happen. And with the senior religious authorities, they have, you know, fundamentally, they appoint those guys, and they show them respect by meeting with them occasionally, but they have made clear that, again, to quote Al Haig, we're in charge here. So I think it will carry on just as it is now, because this is his management of the religious authorities already underway.
We have a question here regarding the Crown Prince. In addition to the Khashoggi killing, What about other behaviors and policies around that time, including the Qatar embargo, the locking up of Saudi business and other leaders and at the Ritz-Carlton, Prime Minister Hariri's, the trip to the kingdom and being held there. Are there concerns that there are other policies that will continue under MBS that would be concerning, or do you think he's learned from these experiences and the international reaction to them?
I think he doubtlessly has learned something from the international reaction to them, but I believe that if he feels that anything is personally threatening to the rule of his father and ultimately him, he will continue to do whatever he believes is necessary, and he controls the levers of power in the country so that he is able to do so.
Looking more broadly at the region, right after President Biden was in Saudi Arabia, Vladimir Putin was in Iran. Put that in the context of U.S. policy, and what challenge do you see, if any, coming from Putin at this point?
Putin is clearly, he has established himself in Syria. He established with Crown Prince Mohammed the OPEC plus cooperation to get the price of oil up some years ago. And both of them have a big incentive to retain that. He is seeking to have more influence in Iran, and as is China. I think the Saudis understand that Russia and China are not likely to use that influence to help them, but I think I think the Saudis need to more fully understand what their options are. Right now, they are obviously trying to be friends with Russia, China, the U.S., and to lead this Arab bloc. But I'm not sure if the U.S. Congress and Republicans and Democrats are going to be content to provide Saudi Arabia what it believes it needs, as long as there is such a diffuse power arrangement in the Middle East. And so they may wind up having to get a little more serious about who are our real friends. I can't fault them now, I must say, for not lining up and saluting the US after 10 years. And they would say after 20 years, actually, because they see the invasion of Iraq by the US, which they told us not to do, as the beginning of the decline in US influence, because we fought the war in Iraq and in Afghanistan and didn't achieve much in either place, certainly not Afghanistan. So I just don't think they trust us right now. I think they understand it would be better if we would be their friend, but they don't believe this one visit, it put an end to the gulf that was getting wider and wider, because Biden was sitting over here saying, you're a pariah. And they were saying, well, if we're a pariah, we're not talking to you. So now at least they have spoken, but I don't think there's any real new confidence in Saudi Arabia that this administration is serious about not allowing a vacuum to be created in the Middle East. And even if it is serious, that it may not be able to control Congress from blocking weapons sales and doing other things that make it difficult to have a U.S. Saudi relationship like the one they would like to have.
Karen, the related question on that, what about the Saudi-China relationship? How does MBS see the kingdom's relationship with China in the context of its relationship with the United States and U.S. concerned about Chinese policies worldwide?
I admit to having had no real conversation with him on China. Others in the of his ministers, make the obvious point that China is now Saudi Arabia's largest trading partner, and that the Crown Prince went there. He came back and began the teaching of Chinese language in Saudi schools, and he is serious about having better relations with China. Whether that's because he sees China as the ultimate winner in the U.S. China confrontation that I think is building, or whether it's just a more bilateral interest, I don't know. But I think we cannot. They have so much in common, frankly. Saudi Arabia and China, they don't harangue each other on human rights. Both of the leaders is looking for complete and total power. No one else in the Communist Party really is supposed to matter except Xi Jinping. And, that's pretty much MBS's plan too. So I think they have a lot in common. Whether Russia now becoming a major seller of oil to China ultimately gets in the way of China buying oil from Saudi Arabia. In other words, they will continue to do some, but whether it diminishes that Russia has now passed Saudi Arabia as China's largest oil supplier. So there is potential for some tension in that relationship if Xi sticks with his no limits relationship with Russia. But I think the Saudis and the Chinese are both very serious about the relationship because China wants to hurt the U.S. and Saudi wants insurance against the U.S. not being there.
Karen, question on Iran. There is a talk that diplomacy facilitated by Iraq could yield an exchange of Saudi and Iranian ambassadors at some point. We see that the UAE is looking to reestablish ties with Iran, but Iran still remains at the top of Saudi security concerns. How do the Saudis see Iran in the broadest context in terms of the mix between diplomacy and their security concerns?
I think their security concerns are so great that could actually drive them to put more emphasis on diplomacy. I mean, as everyone knows, they've been talking. They've had, I guess, 5 meetings with each other. So if you are worried about someone, the best way is to trust your own information, firsthand information. So I can see them reestablishing diplomatic relations. I don't think that would mean, that the enmity is, or the fright of Iran is over. But the whole Middle East is clearly in flux. Everybody's testing everybody right now. And there is no clear, the Middle East is not under US hegemony anymore. So I think everybody is recalculating what is the new world we're in. And I hope the U.S. is recalculating what is the new world we're in, but I fear we're kind of still stuck in the delusion that we're big and we're important, and when we get around to it, everybody will be waiting. They won't. Things are moving on, and if we don't engage in a serious and intelligent and dedicated way, the presidential visit will, I repeat, not only have not improved anything, but it will continue to deteriorate if we don't follow with real action.
Karen, a question here saying you've been traveling to Saudi Arabia for some time. How do you see the progress there overall with regard to the treatment of women and with regard to human rights more broadly?
The treatment of women, I mean, it's, there's nothing about today's Saudi Arabia that bears any resemblance to the 20, 30 years I went there prior to the last 6 years. I mean, it's a completely changed place where women are concerned. Women have always been the best educated in Saudi Arabia. I think in my book, I call them the Avis of Hertz. Avis slogan was, "We try harder." The Saudi women tried harder because they were educated and couldn't get opportunity. And the men didn't try because they had degrees and options and weren't motivated. So I think women will be one of the salvations of Saudi Arabia, and you see it already. They work, they show up, they contribute. And what startles me is when you have meetings with people, it's not the token woman who's in there. There will be sometimes a man and a woman, or a woman with a bunch of men down the table from her, but she's in charge. And the fact that they do that with such ease, I find interesting. On the human rights more generally, clearly political ability to speak out on politics is diminished from the period of King Fahd, King Abdullah. I mean, it was never a place where you could criticize the royal family, but you could criticize policies of ministries that the royal family had approved. And now, clearly people feel very nervous about saying anything critical. So it is harder to get Saudis to talk honestly, because again, Saudi Arabia, much like China, has the capability to listen and monitor its citizens, and people know that. So it's not a place where human rights is improving, I think, at least not yet. But the liberties of people who want more job opportunities are absolutely improving. And you see all kinds of things changing. I mean, they're now selling non-alcoholic beer in grocery stores in Saudi Arabia. That's the way things always work. It's a gentle introduction, and then so I mean, when I was there in March, most people seemed to believe that alcohol would be for sale, if not in Riyadh, in some other parts of the country, certainly on the Red Sea, within a year's time. So things are changing, is my point, changing quite fast. And I think Biden made a big mistake not getting out in the country and looking at, just seeing any of this change. Without a history of going there, it might not have meant anything to him. But if you've watched for 40 years, it's striking and breathtaking to see young people sitting together in Starbucks coffee shops, just like here, talking and working on their computers, and women driving, and women being able to leave the country without their a male's permission. All of those things are huge progress.
Karen, we've gone over time. I'm not surprised. This was a fantastic conversation. I want to thank you for your time today and your contributions to our discussion and understanding of the kingdom. I want to thank our viewers for tuning in with their fantastic questions. And a reminder to all of those out there, please continue to follow all of the news and trends in the Middle East at Al-Monitor.com, and check out our Premium Pro offering for exclusive briefings like the one today, as well as memos by many of the top business, economic, and political experts covering the region.
I'm a loyal reader of Al-Monitor, and I am very honored to be on this program with you. So thank you.
Thank you, Karen. It was a pleasure having you.